In the summer of 1985, Drew Thornton fell from the sky and splattered on a driveway in Knoxville, Tennessee. He had night vision goggles, survival rations, a Browning 9mm, and $15 million of cocaine. But that wasn't all of it. A bear in the woods of northern Georgia found the rest. Cocaine Bear is insane, and a bit of it is actually true, but the real craziness is what led to the situation in the first place. And while everyone from Ronald Reagan to C. Everett Koop blamed Columbia, the real problem was in the District of. So cut a few lines of nostalgia, snort some unintended consequences, and let's rip a fat bump of the unseen. Look, this film is not subtle. You get your cocaine, you get your bear, and you get your cocaine bear. It's got B-movie tropes and dumb humor, but it's a really good time. That's why it's already grossed double its $35 million budget at the box office. But it takes the phrase based on a true story and stretches it like silly putty. In real life, a bear did not snort cocaine off a dead man's leg, it didn't leap into the back of a speeding ambulance, and it didn't blow a load of booger sugar onto a couple of 13-year-olds. It just ate a third of its weight in Colombian marching powder and promptly died. But the real story was strange, and it was a tragic indictment of drug policy. Drew Thornton was smuggling cocaine by flying low over the woods in an overloaded twin-engine Cessna. He and his partner dropped their cargo and bailed out, and Drew was a paratrooper in the Army, so he could probably handle that. And he had that go bag because he was obsessed with survivalism. The police eventually found his compound, which they called a guerrilla warfare training camp. The really interesting thing about Thornton is that he played for both teams. He was a former cop on the Lexington, Kentucky narcotics squad. And he'd also been arrested 4 years prior in connection with a 300-member smuggling organization called The Company, which planned to steal weapons from a Navy installation in California. He served 6 months for flying 1,500 pounds of marijuana into the US for the company, and then he got right back into the drug trade, until his plane flying from Colombia couldn't make it over the Appalachians. And then a bear devoured $2 million worth of cocaine. The whole tactic of aerial drug smuggling is as old as the airplane itself. It's why rum runners turned to pilots during the Prohibition of the 1920s. Great pilots could rush booze over the border and transfer loads from ships off the coast. And by the time the US government had fired the first few shots in its war on drugs, aerial drug running had matured from technology to tactics. Narco-traffickers played cat-and-mouse games to avoid authorities, and small planes were excellent at flying under the radar and hopping borders. But when smugglers were in danger of being caught, they sometimes dropped their goods in the air hoping to retrieve them later. A Time magazine article from 1985 detailed the advancing tactics of a new generation of aerial drug transport. The new parasmugglers fly over a drop zone marked by infrared beacons visible only to the pilot. They dump drugs in containers equipped with infrared glow lights and radio transponders. The plane flies on with the doors and windows open so any remaining specks of cocaine are blown away, allowing the smugglers to pass customs. And look, these payloads were worth a lot more than a plane. It was a legitimately rational strategy to dump the cargo, crash the plane, and recover the drugs after parachuting down. Detecting and regulating small aircraft has come a long way, but in the jungles of northern Guatemala, a lawless frontier still exists where cartels carve out secret airstrips and terrorize locals. There's an associated phenomenon here, narco-deforestation, where fires rip through a forest intentionally set by traffickers to clear land for runways. These fires burned an area twice the size of DC in 2020, and one Guatemalan national park has lost 20% of its tree cover in 20 years. Endangered wildlife, ancient Mayan ruins, these are collateral damage. But is losing a bit of rainforest, ceding control of entire Central and South American countries to cartels, and one bear's OD just the price we pay to keep illegal drugs off the streets? Well, no. The war on drugs doesn't actually eliminate the demand for cocaine or marijuana, just like Prohibition didn't eliminate the demand for alcohol. But it does create perverse incentives that reward increasingly risky and ruthless behavior to keep the supply flowing. We get more creative attempts at smuggling, making stronger drugs that can be cut even if the DEA seizes most of it, and constant, ever-escalating violence to defend territory, fight off rival cartels, and evade the federales. We know that the drug trade is a violent business, and that drugs themselves are increasingly addictive and dangerous. But the exact same thing happened in the 1920s with the stuff you can now buy at the grocery store. Prohibition cultivated the same kinds of incentives, leading to rampant gang violence, smuggling, and moonshine that could peel paint. And the government got in on the manipulation game too. We now know that the US government actually poisoned alcohol in a misguided attempt to make it seem even more dangerous. That sounds crazy, but that hasn't really stopped. Drugs and guns have been run into American cities in an equally insane attempt to infiltrate cartels. Hey, all of this is for your own good. Drugs are bad. They fuel terrible societal problems with dire consequences for everything from the healthcare system to families. But the war on drugs has made all those things worse. We've had overdose epidemics, extensive environmental damage, and perpetual violence and instability. And in the end, the cartels themselves benefit the most. It's why they can afford to treat multi-million-dollar planes as disposable, and it's how they're able to own corrupt local governments. Ending the drug war as we know it would take money and power from the cartels and reduce both their incentive and ability to engage in violent action. It would make it easier for people to seek help and treatment for addictions instead of just going to prison. And it would probably make drugs safer and their associated problems more manageable, even if they were easier to get, which would mean fewer overdoses and deaths. We see all of this in Cocaine Bear. Look, it's not a documentary, but behind the goofball gore, it does reveal the disastrous unintended consequences of the war on drugs. And it doesn't actually have to be that way.